Well, good morning. My name is Adrian, and today we have a special guest. Our guest today is Mr. Matt House, and Matt is the program manager for the Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation, or CDM program, and is responsible for setting the vision and strategy for CDM. As the PM, he identifies opportunities to partner with federal agencies to standardize and enhance their cyber risk, and while also enabling CISA's mission to serve as the operational lead for federal civilian cyber defense. Now, prior to assuming this role, Matt worked in private industry supporting numerous federal, civilian, and DoD customers. And he also served as the project manager for the implementation of the initial versions of the CDM dashboard from 2014 until 2018. So as you can see, he has a lot of experience around the CDM world. Now, during today's event, Matt will provide a brief update regarding the CDM dashboard and answer questions previously submitted by agency dashboard users. This event is in listen-only mode. However, if you have a question or issues, please feel free to post that concern in the chat panel. We will have a team of individuals online ready to assist you if you do have any concerns. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. Matt House.
Thanks, Adrian. Appreciate it. And welcome everyone to today's session. First off, I want to make sure, can everybody hear me okay? I get a proof of life or a thumbs up? Great, thank you. So happy to be here today. I'm going to give kind of my worldview on, I think, some of the notable things that we've achieved recently and where we're going in the near term. I'm also going to then field some of the questions that were submitted already, and in time permitting, if we have additional questions, I'm happy to try and see what I can do off the cuff. It'll be a little bit of an ask me anything. So with that, let's move on to the next slide. What I want to frame out today is a bit of the vision here. This is, vision is kind of a living concept here when it comes to CDM. I think those of you that work the program for any appreciable amount of time know that the target moves on us. Let's talk a little bit about kind of where we think things are going to be in the horizon of 3 to 5 years based off of, what do we want CDM to be? Aspirationally, I think it's fairly straightforward, and I think it's somewhat evolutionary on the trajectory, based on the trajectory that we're already traveling along with respect to the program. First off, we want to be one of those indispensable tools to both agencies and cybersecurity division within CISA. We want to be a weapon of first resort. We want to be that weapon of first resort when we're talking about events left of boom, how to manage in a proactive fashion risk. Where do we go to kind of get this kind of information and that source of truth to know, where to find those worst problems on in the environment, as well as post breach. How do we get a sense of the most urgent needs with respect to mitigating, containing, remediating those kinds of things, assessing major impact, and our role as the operational cyber lead, CISAs, that's a key consideration. We also want to be a major enabler and contributor, and those are the kind of thoughtful choice of words there on agencies' efforts to implement zero trust. So, zero trust implementation, I think most of us will appreciate, involves a significant amount of breaking changes, kind of disruption with respect to maybe the current infrastructures or the legacy infrastructures that are out there within an environment. And thus, no two agencies have the same path to achieve a level of efficacy, if you will, from a zero trust implementation perspective. But CDM, most of what we do very cleanly fits into what the broad majority of agencies will need in moving along that path, right, to achieve zero trust goodness. And so we want to continue to be one of those supporting functions for agencies, recognizing that we can't come in and tell all agencies do X, Y, Z to get to zero trust, but more thoughtfully position and communicate with agencies and plan in a mutual fashion how we can deliver capabilities that get them further in a complementary way. Probably no surprise, given where we have spent the vast majority of our time and energy, in particular with respect to dashboard ecosystem build out over the many years, that we also want to be that primary mechanism for automated information sharing within the federal civilian executive branch. I often talk about the plumbing that's in place now. It's a tremendous amount of effort to get 93 or so agencies able to communicate with CISA and in a bidirectional fashion. And we should be leveraging that investment to the maximum extent possible as an agency. This is the most robust form of that sharing channel, if you will, and it's one where it lends itself to having a well-groomed end user experience through the agency dashboard to make the most of that information. So we see that as a major effort and focus for us in the coming years to continue to enhance what gets delivered down to agencies, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. Certainly some of the questions kind of hit on some of this, and also what information gets passed upwards so that CISA, as that operational cyber lead, can act as a force multiplier to support agencies in need. And lastly, let's talk about kind of when there is an event. And this is not a hypothetical, right? We've all been through this. I think back to my first tour on CDM, back in the era of WannaCry and NotPetya and whatnot. Many of the things that we learned then the hard way, we have better answers to address now. And especially in a post Executive Order 14028 era, the CDM dashboard as a platform for coordinating response across agencies has transformed the way that CISA looks at what federal civilian executive branch cyber coordinated response looks like. We all operate off the same sheet of music now. We all have the same kind of visibility into risks and prevalence of software and vulnerabilities. And that gives us a tremendous purview to be able to leverage what we see at one agency, maybe as that canary when there's something bad that's about to happen, and pivot to support other agencies in a very, very, very precise fashion to help get in front of that more effectively and in just-in-time fashion, and then also find those places within the FSEB where there's really where they're under-resourced or really struggling based on maybe prevalence of a particular vulnerable software that's being exploited or what have you. So this becomes a great mechanism for us to work more effectively across the board. CDM, it's not just the dashboard, but even I would argue even the work we're doing from an EDR perspective with persistent access capability really transforms and enables CISA to meet its mission requirements for being that operational cyber. And we want to be there to be that enabler for all of these things that we've articulated within the CISA Cybersecurity Strategic Plan related to things like the goals like hardening the terrain and stopping immediate threats. Let's move on to the next slide. Now we've kind of done some of that framing. I want to talk a little bit about some of the successes in last year, FY23. A little bit of an eye chart. I realize there's a lot of words on here. Probably broke my own rule with respect to slide design here, but there is a lot of goodness that I want to kind of give credit to the team on. I get to be the one who talks about this, but the team really deserves all the credit. And that's a large team, right? So we've got a lot to be proud of in terms of what we've accomplished. From an asset management perspective, one of those core fundamental capabilities. We are rounding towards home on closing out our activities around what we call traditional asset class asset management. So traditional assets, your laptops, desktops, servers, workstations, the things that by and large dominated the enterprise in the 2012-2013 timeframe, and now maybe less so, but still very notable and very significant. We've really kind of improved a lot with respect to data quality, completeness on that in terms of coverage, and it's really manifested itself in terms of the operational visibility that we have, especially at the federal dashboard level with CISA, and that each agency has within their agency dashboard. But we're not going to finish asset management with the asset class, with the traditional asset class, knowing that we have a sizable and growing proportion of the enterprise that's now mobile devices, cloud assets, or even IoT and operational technology, right? So the work in the asset management space is going to continue. We're just moving further out in terms of addressing different asset classes. The one that's next in line in terms of level of completeness and maturity is the mobile asset management that we've been doing. And last year in particular, we hit a major milestone working with agencies to get some of that data first integrated into the dashboard. So now, our goal from an asset management perspective overall, from a program sense, is to have parity across asset classes in the end state here, so that we've got the same level of operational visibility and the same level of precision in that visibility, regardless of what kind of device it is. There's different pathways to get there. It doesn't always work the same way. Mobile devices, as everyone can appreciate, largely operate in a carrier-dominated ecosystem, whereas traditional assets are, kind of use a different kind of an ecosystem in architecture. Cloud assets is very different when we start talking infrastructure as a service versus software as a service. So these things matter in terms of how we get to that end state. So I think of a game board, and there's many pathways to get from start to finish. But that our goal there of being able to abstract those differences and deliver operational visibility consumed through the CDM dashboard for each of those is critical, and kind of getting to that level within the mobile asset space of working with well over 40 agencies on either enterprise mobility management or mobile threat defense, and getting some of that data plugged into the dashboard is huge, and will continue. Similarly with cloud asset, and in particular, infrastructure as a service cloud asset. Doing some early work now on what asset management mean in a context outside of the IaaS delivery model. And I think that there's some interesting things we're looking at down the road for SaaS in particular. But from an IaaS perspective, we completed our first 2 deployments of Cloud Security Posture Management, or CSPM, and similarly got that data integrated into the CDM dashboard for those agencies. So we really see the aperture growing rapidly in terms of what we can report on within the dashboard, using a data model and a plumbing that is very robust and has been in place and well vetted. And so that makes for an exciting time in terms of what our agency operators can do with this data set that's growing, as well as what our CISA operators can do as we kind of start to analyze what this all means. Near and dear to my heart, CDM dashboard. What's I think most notable in terms of the progress we made this last fiscal year is with what we call ES6, now fully deployed. We have what I'll crudely call over-the-air update capability. In previous iterations of the dashboard, when we wanted to do a notable update to the dashboard, either in terms of new functionality, it was usually coupled fairly heavily with the need for agencies or integrators that are working on behalf of the agencies to do platform updates, make modifications to the data targets, and just go through a fairly significant burden with respect to assessing the change in the package, doing some sort of security impact assessment, working it through their typical change control processes before we had things operational. And that often meant that from release of a new agency dashboard package to getting to better than 95% coverage of everybody on the same version, that could take months. What we've done now with ES6 is we've got the ability to really separate those updates that are platform updates from content updates, which is huge for us. So now we can push out content updates over the air, if you will, much faster, because we've eliminated the need for the draconian administrative burden that often came along in the past when we did any kind of update. So this means that we can separate out those visualizations and those content updates in a manner that they're not security significant, so we can kind of eliminate the need for that kind of a review with agencies, really kind of simplify the change control process, and streamline this so that we can be in a mode where from release of a content pack, calling it, to having 90 to 95% of the agencies with it deployed might take on the order of days, and we can get even faster with that, with some optimizations we're going to be working on. So big change for us in terms of trying to take major strides to what I talked about on the previous slide of positioning CDM to be, an enabler for coordinated response, right? Or be the weapon of first resort. Having the ability to do this over the air kind of updating is critical. EDR, one of our largest efforts on the program today. Born out, of course, out of the SolarWinds incident in 2021, as mandated by the Executive Order 14028. We're still leading the charge on that FSEB-wide for those agencies that need help. By the end of FY23, we had hit a milestone of having procured over 1.2 million endpoint licenses for agencies across 49 different agencies that are participating with us in the EDR program. And that's one set of metrics that we're really proud of, which is getting a level of coverage in terms of number of agencies as well as the percentage of devices within an agency that are under EDR management, right? And these are traditional asset class devices. That's huge. But what's also really exciting and really started to kind of come into its own in FY23 is the next step on this. Getting the EDR capability out there, especially for the agencies, that's significant. But what's really changing the landscape in terms of CISA's ability to make a difference, to be a force multiplier for the FSEB from a cyber defense and cyber response capability, or response perspective, is the persistent access capability pack. It's a very, very straightforward process to basically enable PAC with those EDR solutions that we've been working with agencies on over the past several years. And it's a game changer in terms of giving CISA analysts the ability to, in a very, very precise fashion, do additional reconnaissance as tipped off by things that are seen perhaps in the CDM dashboard or through other alerting mechanisms, kind of fine-grained reconnaissance and analysis against the EDR data sets within an agency for devices that are problematic or potentially problematic or looking like they might be anomalous, and working with agencies using that kind of capability to take very precise surgical action as necessary to do further investigation. I can tell you that when we think about what happens today in the standard process for an agency SOC sees something, they need some help, they call up CISA, they say we need some incident responders to support us on this investigation. That process can take up to a week between the first phone call to CISA to when those resources are able to arrive on site with their flyaway packs, and then help us all, please, get CISA equipment on an agency network and connected. We all know how much of an administrative burden that can be, and it's maddening when we think about that in the context of trying to be, a rapid incident response force. It's not uncommon for that to take days, if not weeks. And what I can say is PAC changes all of that radically. We can now operate at near line speed for agencies that are integrated with that capability in CISA to operate in near real time, and without the need to forward deploy folks to an agency's physical location. So our ability to support those agencies in need, radically different, radically better. It really is a way that CISA is going to fulfill its relatively newly levied statutory requirements and authority. Significant. The other piece to the kind of post SolarWinds response that we are responsible for within the program is what we call host visibility. So this is was an early effort and begun in end of FY22, early FY23, around providing some additional capability for greatly enhanced visibility into endpoints that is complementary to EDR. And it's more than just what we do from an asset management perspective on STIG. It's really intended to be a complement to EDR, more so than an enhancement to asset management, because we know that some adversaries, some of the most sophisticated nation-state adversaries, have methodologies for trying to evade EDR detection, or EDR defenses, I should say. And so HLV becomes the complement to EDR in terms of being able to detect advanced malicious behavior. We completed our initial deployments across 5 agencies last fiscal year. We demonstrated that it's significant, this capability. It really adds a lot of value. And what's really interesting about kind of the nature of the new types of visibility we get through HLV is we can detect things like behavior and anomalous activity using tools that are not malicious. And so the great example that we can reference is CISA in FY23 released a CSA on some activity from a PRC associated with what we call living off the land, using native tools and tool sets in a malicious and unintended fashion, right? To do damage, if you will, but using tools that are not malicious in and of themselves and not unexpected to be seen on all these devices. With HLV, we now have capabilities to censor against behavior and separate that out, and that's brand new for us in terms of crossing the threshold from being able to do attribute-based sensing, which is largely what I'll call things like asset management, if you will, of what's on a device and what the device looks like, to how is it behaving, right? That's huge. So a lot more to come there. I'll talk a little bit about that in a couple minutes in terms of what we look forward to in this fiscal year. And then lastly, we're going through a lot of programmatic changes within CDM, and happy to report, and as much as I can talk about this stuff right now in this venue, we have a new design, if you will, kind of from a program structure perspective on a new business model, how we want to operate internally, how we want to reevaluate how we bring capabilities from ideation to delivery, and how we want to operate with agencies. And this is also manifested through how we plan to execute our successors to the defend contract. We issued our first of those solicitations in FY23, and are kind of well on our way towards having some resolution on what an award looks like for that and what follow-on actions will be as part of a suite of new contracts. So that's it at a high level. If we could transition over, I'm going to talk about, move to the next slide. What are the priorities for FY20? Probably spend another 45 minutes just talking about this. Really at a high level, I'm going to summarize this as kind of across four things here, and then we'll hit on other things as we get into questions. Certainly. From an asset management perspective, I think I kind of touched a little bit on this when I was talking about the asset class. It's driving towards parity, right? It's getting the maximum number of agencies that are ready from a mobile asset management perspective integrated into the CDM Dashboard. Getting their EMM capabilities, which we see as table stakes, really, with respect to kind of asset management for mobile devices, plugged in, working with those agencies to get mobile threat defense capabilities fielded, which largely get us to a place of parity for mobile devices that we have with traditional asset class devices through the EDR capabilities. Not exactly the same, but very, very, very similar. So that's a big push for us, right? Is pushing that, to the maximum extent. Same with cloud. We are also this year finishing up some initial work on evaluating, what are we going to do with respect to embracing the need to do the same kinds of things for Internet of Things, IoT devices, operational technology devices, and what are those unique characteristics in those ecosystems and in those asset classes that we need to account for so that we can start to, in the pipeline fashion, get new capabilities fielded for those assets. From an identity access management perspective, our primary focus for FY24 is continuing that in progress work we've done with agencies for privileged access management, PAM, and identity lifecycle management. So there were numerous agencies, again, coming out of the SolarWinds breach and the retrospectives that identified that need. We've been working with those agencies for the better part of the last couple of years. I think we're really kind of getting to a good place with those agencies that needed that help. And we see that as adding significant value to agencies. We'll continue that forward into FY20. From an EDR perspective, I referenced a very large number, 1.2 million on a previous slide. Our goal for FY24 is for those agencies that had raised their hand by the beginning of the fiscal year, said, we have a gap, we have a need, this is what we think the need is. Knowing what that total number of assets that are to be under management and under kind of coverage from an EDR perspective, getting that closed out, filling those gaps. Doesn't mean that we won't discover new gaps along the way. We already have during this fiscal year. There's agencies that just weren't quite ready or have since reassessed where they were, either through their own initially funded capabilities, or there's been some other changes. So we'll still have some work trailing into FY25 for newly identified gaps. But our real strong push this year is to get to support agencies in meeting the OMB and National Security Advisor guidance on coverage of greater than 90% for applicable devices being covered under EDR. So that's a huge focus for us and continues to be this fiscal year, as well as getting the maximum number of agencies on the PAC. If there was one single thing we could do that has the greatest impact on CIS's ability to support agencies, it's PAC. Or none. And it's a relatively straightforward administrative process. It's a very low level of effort for those agencies that already have the EDR at some level of deployment. They don't have to be done with EDR. They don't have to hit some magical threshold of 90% complete on their gap fills before we can do PAC. We can do it today for the vast majority of agencies. And the vendor ecosystems that manifest this capability are really taking massive strides in terms of being ready to support what we need. So it's the single probably most significant thing we're going to do this year. And then lastly, from a dashboard perspective, I'm a big fan of that over-the-air update capability. Now's the time to use it. So when we talk a lot about operationalization of CDM investments, making this valuable to agencies so that CDM becomes the standard operating environment for cyber analysts, SOC analysts, for information assurance professionals, or those folks who work in compliance. We want to be that Swiss Army knife, right? And we're not going to get there if we don't have timely, relevant visualizations to drive usage of the dashboard. And so one of the ways we're going to do that is through these rapid content updates. And in particular, what we're focusing on this fiscal year is continuing the push towards automated FISMA reporting. And then we'll deliver incremental capabilities along the way this fiscal year through content packs to enable more and more automated reporting, which is, I think, a great quality of life improvement for our agency counterparts that are responsible for this, and instills a greater level of confidence into what was always intended to be, kind of the FISMA annual CIO metrics effort. Right? So that's it at a high level in terms of priorities. I'm sure there's probably 6 or 7 pages worth of of additional things that we'll be doing this year, but in terms of the most impactful ones that I wanted to call out, that's it. If we can move to the next slide, please. The last thing I'll mention with respect to kind of big movements for us are going to be kind of evolving how we execute on them. I mentioned this a couple minutes ago. We are changing what I'll call broadly our business model. This includes how we work with agencies, how we work with industry, how we communicate with our stakeholders, of which there are many populations and subpopulations and communities of interest and whatnot. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to be doing a series of kind of retoolings of our standard processes. We're going to be introducing a new agency engagement model. Today we have variability across the agencies in terms of roles and responsibilities, and it's not necessarily as clean and as standardized as it could be. And the reality is, in a tightening budget climate, we need to kind of make sure that we remain on the same page with agencies on who does what and what the expectations are on both sides, right? Not just on our side, but on their side as well. So that's something that we've had under development, and we'll be kind of unveiling this fiscal year, working with agencies on that. Streamlining capability development. Part of this reflects the way that we're changing the model as far as our contracts and the way we have traditionally done 5 defend orders that are very, very similar. And then, of course, Foxtrot, as a shared service for small micro is a little bit different. Collapsing down a lot of that, work that's data services oriented into the Betsy contract is going to allow us to do some, streamlined capability development. That's huge for us in terms of efficiencies, driving standardized and enterprise-based approaches, and being more cost-effective again in a climate that is going to require that. So big change for us internally, but one we're super excited about. We are kind of building into these, also really starting to put some additional formality behind how we're going to make investment decisions. And I'll talk a little bit about this when we talk about program roadmap stuff. But there's a lot we can do in terms of addressing needs from agencies, addressing desires of our cyber operators within CISA. But we've got to be able to reconcile and kind of make the most of what are kind of limited resources. We want to add more formality into how we make those investment decisions. And then, as I've mentioned, we're in the process of executing the acquisition portion of that to move beyond defend area. Next slide, please. So we'll transition into some questions that I think we have about 12 or 13 or so that were pre-staged. I see some that are coming up in chat as well. So I'll do my best to kind of get through as many of these as possible. First question, any updates on the integration of the Cyber Hygiene report into the dashboard? So Cyber Hygiene program run out of one of our sister organizations within Cybersecurity Division, Management, effectively some of the external scanning that's done from of federal agencies, what's exposed to the internet, making really good progress. I think nearing completion on getting those data sets integrated natively, if you will, into CDM that will be delivered back out to agencies. And this is an example of kind of where we want to drive operationalization of the CDM investment by making CDM Dashboard the primary mechanism for sharing machine-based automated risk information. So make it easier on the end user so that we have one place to collect it, where all this information is collected and delivered to them, versus separate portals based on the different technologies and capabilities that we fielded with. So good progress there. I expect we'll have we'll have this as a milestone that we'll probably talk about on the significant achievements for FY24 sometime. Can we consider doing periodic roadmap updates and sharing what that looks like? And how does this work, right? So yeah, absolutely. So part of the business model kind of updates that we've been working on is looking to, I'd say, revamp a little bit the road mapping process that we do. And this is both a function of wanting to be more transparent with our agency counterparts and partners. If you think back to what do we want CDM to be, that first slide where I said we want to be an enabler and contributor to the zero trust efforts of agencies, hard to do that if we're not really kind of clearly articulating what we think we're going to be doing in the near future so that agencies can make complementary investments. So we definitely want to be a little bit more transparent in that and a little bit crisper in what we're saying. What's also driving this is, not to oversimplify, but our stakeholder community has grown significantly over the past 3 or 4 years. We've always considered the FSEB agencies our number one stakeholder community as our user base, if you will, or primary user base. In a post-Executive Order 14028 world, what's really kind of been interesting is the changes there in terms of statutory authority that CISA has and the way that CDM is now being used has turned Cybersecurity Division into its own first-class user of CDM in a way that rivals the level of significance that the agencies have. Agencies are still number one, but we also now have to consider the way that we want CDM to support our vulnerability management counterparts, our threat hunting counterparts, our directives and guidance counterparts, cyber performance management, many different constituencies within CFD. What does that do? That also opens up another channel of kind of input on what we should be doing. Add to that, the way that we work with OMB and others, we have a lot of channels by which we get entries into the suggestion. So what does that mean? That means we need to be a lot more rigorous, a lot more thoughtful in how we then reconcile those to our immediate plans for the fiscal year, align those with spend plans, how we align those with our budget requests, and develop a more comprehensive roadmap. So in short, yes, we're working on that. We expect that will be a function of new capabilities we want to field at layer A that are integrated into the dashboard, and then also content backup for the dashboard. What are the next steps as far as HLV? So I talked a little bit about that. Here's what I can say, and reference that it leverages Sysmon. So we found that it was very successful in terms of giving us visibility and insight into a whole new class of interesting things, right? I mentioned that before with the example of the living off the land style detections that we can do. Not surprisingly, what we find is that with this capability comes a lot of additional data, on the order of 6 figures worth of cost data if we think about various straightforward ways to scale this out beyond what we did in FY, and that's not tenable. So where we've spent the bulk of our time since we rounded the corner into FY24 is evaluating some options as far as what are those dials that we can tune to either kind of be more precise about what kind of data we need to collect, maybe kind of tune the sensor a little bit, identify which devices would be, if we can't do all devices within an enterprise, maybe there's a subset that has the greatest impact. Is that HVA? Is that, servers? Is that, what have you? Is it something where we can do some combination of that, maybe some combination of which agencies, we scale agencies out differently, right, in terms of kind of prioritized fashion? So we're still doing a lot of that analysis, and it's one of these things where a minor adjustment on the dial can have in the out years tens of millions of dollars worth of kind of impact. So doing a lot of sensitivity analysis there. Hope to have some recommendations to our leadership within about a quarter or so to kind of figure out what next steps will be with respect to. Can we share some of the successes with Seth? So to me, when I see Seth, CDM Enabled Threat Hunting, I think about like the HLV use case, right? To me, it's one and the same. So good example, we've had success in being able to verify that we can see malicious activity in near real time. we started to develop in counterpart with our threat hunting leads and operators, kind of the ability to, and the methodologies to be able to kind of look for some of those things and kind of use that to factor in. All kind of early days in terms of that, in terms of it being operational. But success has been that we now know that we can see things that are not going to be things that a vulnerability scanner or a configuration settings kind of defect detection will ever pick up. Things that are going to go well beyond just knowing what's in the asset management, the asset inventories, if you will. So we know that it's out there, and that's a huge success for us in terms of kind of the viability of this. Do we see this working together with EDR and PAC? Absolutely. The way I see this is CDM Dashboard is a great venue for doing kind of broad enterprise-wide kind of assessment and looking for anomalies that might stick out a little bit. It's not the only way to do that, but generally speaking, that's one of the values of how operators can leverage the CDM data set. And find some of those things that look like they might be anomalous and do some greater digging. And then when you're ready to do that digging, well, EDR and PAC is a great surgical tool to do that, to drill in precisely into those devices, get richer information about them that gives you insight to be able to assess whether or not that anomaly is just an abnormality, maybe a sick machine versus malicious behavior. And then what we learned during the exercises around kind of doing that analysis from an EDR and PAC perspective, well, that can help influence and inform what we need to be looking for on the CDM dashboard side of the house in terms of attributes and indicators of compromise, right? So they feed into one another, this kind of positive feedback loop that we see really taking off in the next couple of years in an operational sense. I think that kind of touches on most of this as far as kind of how we're going to kind of share bidirectional data. Still thinking through some of that. I think there's advantages to these being somewhat independent, especially when we start talking about operating some of these capabilities in contested environments. So not sure that we have a kind of consensus, if you will, on how the data needs to flow back. Yeah. How is the CDM federal dashboard being used? So I think of it as no less than 3 major communities within CISA that are using the dashboard on a daily basis. Our vulnerability management counterparts are using the dashboard all day, every day. They do things like prevalence analysis. So when you think about the recent emergency directive 2401 that was released around some Avanti products, leading into that notice, VM was doing a lot of work to understand through what we could sense in the dashboard. Where do we see hotspots? Who do we think has the greatest exposure? They do a lot of work around formalize, from the KEV perspective around, what's going on there, like how are agencies responding and addressing some. Our threat hunters, as I just mentioned, this is one of the tools in their bag of tricks when it comes to kind of identifying and qualifying anomalous and malicious behavior, alongside things like EDR, right? It's a complement to what they can sense through other data sources and data sets and tools that they have available to them. And it's one of their primary ones, right? For doing some of that work. I also think about the teams that do directives and guidance, provide guidance to agencies. This is a key thing when it comes to determining, do we need to issue a BOD? Do we need to issue an emergency directive? Is there something from a KEV perspective that is significant enough? Well, it's not just VM that's doing some of that analysis. It's even some of our give strong, precise guidance that we know is actionable. And we see CDM Dashboard as being one of those feedback mechanisms. One of the great things about it is when we issue a directive, the dashboard is aligned in such a way that we're giving you agencies the ability also to know when you're done, right? Like we see the same things and we have the same definition of done. That's tremendously powerful. So yeah, I mean, as I said a couple minutes ago, CSD is a daily user of the federal dashboard in a way that we would not have envisioned just a couple of years ago. Question. Okay, so as agencies operationalize their CDM data, the ability to tailor the dashboard is critical, right? So can we talk about kind of the future of the dashboard and in particular around DBAS, right? So yeah, let's talk about DBAS for a couple minutes. DBAS, Dashboard as a Service, that's where CISA, on behalf of agencies, will host their agency dashboard instance in a secure cloud environment in a way that's logically separated from any other agency. So a secure, kind of segmented multi-tenant environment. We're a big fan of DBAS. DBAS gives us greater control over the what is now becoming a very streamlined over-the-air content updating process. It makes it that much easier for us to then get not just to control the deployment of those packages after release, because we're controlling the infrastructure. That's huge because it means that the round trip from, or the latency from release of new content back to agency end user logging in and seeing it is that much shorter. We have certain economies of scale. The more agencies we get on board with DBAS, the more we're able to kind of leverage economies of scale for us. And we program that into our future planning from a budgetary perspective to have growth there. And I think that's still very attainable for us. It solves some configuration management problems. And frankly, on the agency side, it's a pretty good deal because we'll bear all the burden of the costs and the labor associated with managing that infrastructure, right? Agencies don't have to do that if we opt in for DBAS. What are the trade-offs? Well, the trade-off traditionally has been beyond some of the initial provisioning process and connectivity stuff that's just one of those classic government-oriented administrative burdens to overcome. Beyond that is, okay, well, then you're kind of getting the vanilla version and your ability to do customization. And there's an example here of VA. We know VA does a lot of customization within their dashboard today for supporting some of their agency-specific needs and business processes. Love that. I think that's awesome. It's a great way to, kind of hopefully get more out of the investments and drive usage. So what's the balance here, right? So we've gone through an analysis, in the past 90 days or so to formulate a trajectory for being able to kind of, over time, allow for more and more customization of DBAS instances to support use cases like the VA, where there's something that's unique to what they're doing. They need a different level of control over their environment, right? Because they want to be able to build some of these things out or kind of have certain level of configuration management responsibility that you don't necessarily have in a classic as a service arrangement. That's fine. We can work that through. There's obviously ramifications when it comes to configuration management for platform updates and all those things that as an agency customer, you don't want to have to worry about anymore when you start to do as a service. So we're working through a couple models. We evaluated several models on this, and I think we have a trajectory to kind of get close to what I'll call the happy medium there within the next 12 months or so. But work still being done on that. Our objective, what I'd like to be able to have all agencies on DBAS within probably, let's say, 2 to 3 years, and that not be something we have to force agencies to do, especially in these cases where there's some technical complexity, if you will, but have it be something where we've hit the mark of incentivizing agencies in all the right ways to make that move. Next question. How are STIG specific reports integrated in the dashboard? So we use under our configuration settings management today. Primarily speaking, we use STIG Cat 1 results for being reported up through CSM. There's work that's underway to kind of integrate CIS baselines as well into this. CSM as one of our first 4 capabilities under asset management, probably the one that has the most variability in terms of value to agencies and to CISA as a whole, because it's the nature of the game's a bit different. But when we think about kind of what that means in the dashboard context, it's still valuable to us. I think what we're going to see is we're going to try and see more incorporation of this, like the CIS standards, so that we can get a more robust CSM data set. That would be something that I think we'd like to see, trying to figure out how we can do that in a way that kind of balances out, against other priorities. Next question. CDM reporting reflect the FISMA score. So I'll interpret this kind of broadly and generically, as in like the agency FISMA metrics that OMB publishes on an annual basis in terms of guidance and what has been reported. Does CDM reflect that? Yes, in a growing fashion, we can produce the data that's going to be reported against those metrics that are called out, and as I mentioned earlier, through the content updates we were planning to do and have done to date, looking to automate as much of that reporting as is possible, primarily in like the Section 1 arena, if you will, of those metrics. So yes, we reflect it, but we are just reporting on it. So it's not something where we necessarily influence it. And I would say that one of the things that we collectively as a community have to kind of be prepared to fully embrace is some of that mental or emotional reconciliation between the legacy spreadsheet once a quarter kind of processes for reporting some of the stuff with what CDM says, and how those often arrive at different answers for something that should be straightforward, like number of devices. And how we kind of solve those problems and kind of ensure that what we're doing from a CDM perspective, all we can do is report the facts. Do we have confidence that we're fully reporting those facts and that there's no errors? So that's still an ongoing effort for us collectively. Next question. What future CDM dashboard capabilities are in the works for reporting mobile devices and those which are unauthorized? So as I mentioned earlier, big effort for us this fiscal year is to integrate EMM capabilities and the data reported from those for mobile devices into CDM Dashboard. That's the great thing about what we've seen with EMM in particular, although the same applies to mobile threat defense as well, is that when we started to really kind of turn up the heat on that, as far as the program's focus and effort on that, a lot of agencies already had solutions in place. They could bring those to the table, and so what we're finding is that some of those agencies are able to just go directly to integration. And there's a relatively small number of products that are out there that cover down on a vast majority of agencies' mobile infrastructure and asset populations. So we're finding now that we're gaining some speed in terms of tackling that integration effort. Because there's just only so many permutations, right? And we're kind of getting to that critical mass of having kind of encountered and solved that problem at least once per. So that's that's kind of the area of focus for us in terms of what's not authorized. Again, some of this comes down to working with agencies on operational processes to identify the different. This is the classic problem of hardware asset management of, does my expected inventory match my my actual inventory, and what are the differences on both sides of that? But again, with the mindset that we want to drive towards parity in the capability, just done maybe through a different implementation path, our goal is to kind of give agencies those capabilities in the dashboard, the same way they would be able to detect unauthorized traditionally. Next question. What's the future of Aware? Good question. To be perfectly honest, I'm not sure. Where are we with Aware? We've not revved it in a while. I think some agencies find great value in it. A lot of agencies track it closely and appreciate that. What we have seen within CISA is that the known exploited vulnerabilities process has really been valuable in terms of polarizing all of us in the FSEB to work to meet urgent, immediate needs. And what have we found? The reason that KEVs exist is in part because scoring when it comes to vulnerabilities is it's a challenge to balance impact with prevalence, right? And KEVs kind of cuts out some of that need to do the balancing and just focus on kind of what we know is being exploited so that we can focus on prevalence. So I think some of those who are in the audience that are really big into understanding vulnerability management processes and kind of the academics of it will consider KEV to be maybe a lighter weight, or dare I say, a dumbed down version of something that Aware really kind of gets at. What we find is that it's actually pretty effective. I mean, it's a pretty effective thing for us to kind of to work with agencies on, and it's actually a really good selling point for the agency when we can talk about how what our operators are seeing in the wild being linked to things like directives that say you will respond to these KEVs by this date and remediate them, with the dashboard being the nice easy button on how agencies can demonstrate compliance with them. So I would say the future of Aware, uncertain, because we're focused a lot on kind of getting the most juice out of KEV. Next question, and I know that we're getting up on time. I can probably go over a few minutes for those that want to stick around. Is the PMO evaluating how AI can be leveraged? Yes, we are. We're interested in that. I think I would say that we're trying to be a little deliberately thoughtful as to when we start to really go into that. Not that we're not interested in it, but just that there's a lot of things that we've got in terms of our priority queue that I've already gone over. And right now, we're also kind of in a support mode for other CSD components or CSD elements that are doing more with respect to AI. And they've been tasked with doing some specific things in response to the executive order. And we want to kind of see how some of that nets out and glean some of the goodness that is their analysis and their experience before we go down the path of doing something. So a little bit of wait and see for us, but kind of we're very interested party. Question? Is there more information on how CDM and Zero Trust will relate? Yes, coming very soon. In terms of the work that some of our architecture and engineering teams have done to map in a very detailed fashion CDM capabilities to not just pillars, but also maturity levels within the pillars. There's a lot of thought we've done there. And we're working to kind of rephrase a lot of what we're doing and understand how does that map, our capabilities, generally speaking, kind of map one-to-one to a particular pillar, but not necessarily everywhere. And kind of where we want to get to is really kind of being able to, going back to maybe that first or second question about roadmap, be able to articulate, hey, this is where we see the things that we've done to date mapping against the Zero Trust framework. And notice where we maybe have fewer capabilities in these areas, application pillars, where we're going to look to make some investments in the coming years to kind of give a more balanced kind of Zero Trust broad perspective. The more to come there. Some of this involves some graphics wizardry. Some of this involves some analysis that we've done that we'll be sharing through avenues like customer advisory. Question 13. How do we use CDM data to identify trends for warrant management, broad oversight perspective? I think what I want to go back to on this is that example I mentioned a couple minutes ago on the KEV, right? So CDM is a fantastic data set in being able to inform our analysts, in particular, I'll call out the VM analysts, to understand prevalence. When we start talking about what are, there's other more formal efforts to define as a proper noun the set of critical software, right? But what are those pieces of software that we either know based on what industry, what the market tells us are prevalent or ubiquitous or buggy, or we know our vectors, open up vectors of attack. So there's tons of data for us to kind of use to model and kind of do some of that analysis. And then that feeds into kind of, well, then if we know that we see a trend of something really bad happening, either because we see a lot of network devices that are using default passwords, or we know that some malicious actors are targeting VPN concentrators or what have you, like we use the data kind of to inform some of that, and then based on some, and vice versa, some of those things that we're learning, that our analysts are learning outside of CDM, they can then go back to CDM's data set and kind of use to kind of course correct or whatever. And what often happens is, well, that results in the need for CISA to issue specific guidance, right? Either a CSA or a BOD, emergency directive, or what have you, right? So we act as part of that, the ingredients that are thrown into the bowl to kind of inform policy actions like that. And then we're also that mechanism for measuring compliance and progress again. So I think the good news story here is there have been a lot of, I wouldn't call them breakdowns in the past, but a lot of siloed processes. And now, not exclusively because of CDM, but as one contributing factor. Some of this is also the way that we're organized within CSD today versus maybe a few years ago. We're also supporting the breakdown of silos and connecting these cross-organizational business processes into something that's a lot more streamlined, a lot more valuable, a lot more timely, and kind of takes us to that next level. I think those are all the questions that we had in the slide deck, if I'm not mistaken, Adrian.
Yes, that was the last question in the slide deck. I do think we had one or two questions that came in the chat. If you want, we can read those off. I know we're a little bit over on time, but like I said, I don't want to take you away I know you're very busy, Matt.
Sure.
If you have to step away. But the first question is, how is CISA engaging with agency leaders, not just CDM POCs, to share the vision and get their buy-in?
Yeah, good question. So our plan, when I mentioned things like wanting to have a new agency engagement model, we recognize this is something where we're going to have to hit it bottom up and top down. So our plan is to do that, two-pronged, right? We're going to continue to work with our CDM POCs to kind of get the message out there about what these things are. That'll be through our normal channels, things like the CAF and what have you. But we're also likely going to, at the end of the spring, early summer, kind of embark on what I'll classically call a road show to work with each agency kind of OCIO leadership, if you will, be it the CISO, the CIO. I'll take a meeting with anybody to kind of provide that top level kind of awareness of where we want to go directionally, roadmap perspective, a business model perspective, kind of dispel and repeat some of the information, dispel the disinformation and repeat the information on kind of how this is mechanically going to work, and continue to, that's not a one-time thing, right? Like continue to maybe on a semi-annual fashion engage with those senior leaders so that we know that the great work that the POCs are doing to try and get the information upwards in the organization doesn't just kind of get lost, but it is also coming back down.
All right. And then the other question that we received, do any other agencies besides TVA have OT equipment or devices? And then I'll follow on with that is, are there any other agencies that have critical infrastructure implications? And then how will CDM requirements be adjusted for OT or SCADA devices?
I think the short answer is yes. Yes. And okay, the last one's a little bit longer than so, but yes, we know that other agencies have OT. I won't argue that I can fully appreciate all the OT that's out there, right? And I think anybody who says they do understand is mistaken. We know that it exists throughout, and we haven't necessarily fully baselined what our definition of OT is. Like I would argue medical IT is OT from the perspective of HHS or VA, right? Well, that's important for us to kind of be clear about, right? OT could be other things in terms of facilities or other, kind of environmental sensors. So we know that TVA is not alone in that. And we know that this is something we need to focus on. And I consider OT, to some extent, SCADA, right? I realize OT, ICS, SCADA, they all have their nuanced differences, and I don't want to be too crude and kind of lumping them all into one bucket, but I'm going to lump them into one bucket, and I'm going to call that kind of the asset class that today we're talking about as our OT asset class. And so when I talked earlier about the different asset classes and kind of moving progressively through them as we get to near completion with one and kind of spin up the next set of those kind of asset management capabilities, pretty much done with traditional, hot and heavy with mobile, really kind of moving towards a nice warm state with cloud. And then for IoT and then OT, again, they're not quite the same. We're still in early days of understanding kind of what unique capabilities there are that are out there that we can potentially explore in a lab setting to appreciate kind of what we can do to arrive at parity and operational visibility of those assets, but recognizing the uniqueness of their, it's not just their, how fragile they are, but how we might need to just do that sensing differently, maybe in a more passive fashion, because it doesn't make sense from a risk perspective to deploy agents, and it might not even make sense from a technology perspective. So we're early on in that, in that kind of formulation. But we think we'll probably be in fairly decent shape to be able to talk about what those requirements look like, within the coming 6 months.
All right. Well, that sums up the question portion of today's webinar. Once again, Matt, I just want to thank you for taking time out of your day and providing that knowledge to us, back to the CDM community. I want to thank everyone for participating and being involved in today's course. I wish everyone a great week and look forward to seeing you in future webinars and courses that we host. Take care.
Thanks, everyone, for attending. Appreciate it.